The day my parents walked into my factory, I was standing behind the glass wall of my office, watching the production floor where dozens of women worked with flour-dusted aprons and gentle smiles. I recognized my mother's gray hair first, then my father's stooped shoulders. They looked older, smaller somehow, as they stood nervously in the reception area. They had no idea that the woman they'd thrown out 26 years ago was now the owner of the largest bakery operation in the county. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it really began. With a 19-year-old girl standing on a street corner with nothing but cardboard boxes and a dream that felt more like desperation. If this story touches your heart, please hit the like button and let me know in the comments if you've ever felt completely abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. I was 19 when my world collapsed. The morning I told my parents I was pregnant, I expected shock, maybe disappointment, but not the cold fury that filled our kitchen like poison gas. My mother's face went white, then red, then something harder than stone. My father just stared at me like I'd confessed to murder. "How could you do this to us?" my mother whispered, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "How could you bring this shame on our family?" I tried to explain what had happened at the college party, how I'd been drinking for the first time, how things got blurry and wrong, and I woke up in a room I didn't recognize with my dress torn, and my whole world changed. But they wouldn't listen. They couldn't see past their own humiliation to the trauma written all over their daughter's face. "You're lying," my father said, his voice flat and final. "You're just trying to cover up your mistakes with stories." That's when I knew I was truly alone. The two people who had raised me, who had kissed my scraped knees and cheered at my graduation, refused to believe that their daughter could be a victim. In their minds, I was just a disappointment, a stain on their reputation that needed to be erased. They gave me 3 days to handle the situation or find somewhere else to live. When I told them I was keeping the baby, my mother packed my clothes in garbage bags and left them on the front porch. My father changed the locks that same afternoon. I spent the first night in my car, crying until I had no tears left, one hand pressed against my still flat belly, promising my unborn child that somehow, some way, I would build us a life worth living. The next morning, I drove to the cheapest motel I could find and used my savings from my part-time job to rent a room by the week. I had maybe $300 to my name, no family, and a baby coming in 7 months. Most people would have seen only impossibility. I saw my first deadline. I'd always been good at baking. It was the one thing my grandmother had taught me before she passed. The one skill that had nothing to do with grades or achievements or making my parents proud. In that tiny motel room with a hot plate and a mixing bowl I'd shoplifted from a grocery store, I started making cakes. My first customers were the other motel residents, people who understood what it meant to be forgotten by the world. I charged $5 for a personal cake, nothing fancy, just something sweet to remind them they were worth celebrating. Word spread slowly through the network of overlooked people, the night shift workers, the single mothers, the elderly folks whose families had stopped calling. I remember the first time I made $50 in a day. I sat on that stained motel bedspread, counting crumpled bills and feeling like I'd discovered gold. My baby kicked for the first time that night, as if she knew we were going to be okay. By my 6th month, I was selling cakes from cardboard boxes on the street corner outside the community college. I'd gotten permission from the security guard, an older man named Frank, who bought a slice of my chocolate cake every Tuesday and told me I reminded him of his daughter. The students loved having fresh cake between classes, and I was making enough to move into a small apartment in the discount housing complex across town. That's where I met David. He was visiting his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, carrying her groceries up 2 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again. I was struggling with my own bags, 8 months pregnant and exhausted, when he stopped to help. "You shouldn't be carrying all that," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Here, let me." David was 45, a widower with a 12-year-old daughter named Emma. His wife had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, and he carried that grief like a weight that had settled permanently in his shoulders. But when he looked at me, something in his eyes softened. "I smell cake," he said, smiling for the first time since I'd met him. "Are you a baker?" I told him about my little business, how I was saving up to rent a real kitchen space after the baby came. He listened with the kind of attention I'd forgotten existed, like my words actually mattered. "Emma loves to bake," he said. Maybe you could teach her sometime? I'm not much good at the domestic stuff." That's how it started. David would bring Emma over on weekends, and we'd bake together in my tiny kitchen. Emma was quiet at first, still raw from losing her mother, but she had gentle hands and a natural instinct for flavors. She'd suggest adding orange zest to the vanilla cake or trying cinnamon in the chocolate frosting, and she was always right. When my daughter Sarah was born, David was the one who drove me to the hospital. He held my hand through the contractions and cried when she took her first breath. Emma made a welcome home cake with pink frosting and wobbly letters that spelled, "Hi, baby Sarah." For 2 years, we were a family of choice. David helped me get a small business loan to rent a proper kitchen space. Emma became the big sister Sarah never would have had. We had Sunday dinners and homework help and bedtime stories. I thought I'd found my forever. But forever is a luxury that life doesn't always provide. David's cancer diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Pancreatic, stage 4, maybe 6 months if we were lucky. He told me while Sarah napped in her crib and Emma was at school, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Emma doesn't have any other family. If something happens to me, would you—" "Yes," I said before he could finish. "Of course. Always." Those 6 months were the hardest of my life. Watching this good man, this gentle father, fade away piece by piece while trying to shield Emma from the worst of it. My cake business grew during that time, maybe because I poured all my grief into the mixing bowls. But success felt hollow when the person who'd believed in me most was disappearing. David died on a Sunday morning in April, with Emma holding one hand and me holding the other. His last words were, "Take care of my girls," and I promised him I would. The funeral was small. A few neighbors, some colleagues from the engineering firm where David had worked, and his elderly parents who flew in from Florida. They were kind to me, grateful that their son hadn't been alone, but they made it clear that Emma should come live with them. "She needs stability," David's mother said gently. "A proper family situation." I wanted to fight them. Emma was my daughter in every way that mattered. But I was 23 years old, unmarried, with a toddler, and a small business that barely paid the bills. What court would choose me over loving grandparents with a secure retirement and a good school district? The night before Emma left, she climbed into my bed and cried against my shoulder. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "Can't you come with us?" "You need to be with your real family," I told her, hating every word. "But I'll always be your friend. I'll always love you." She pressed something into my hand, a small notebook filled with cake recipes she'd written down in her careful 12-year-old handwriting. "So you don't forget me," she said. I kept that notebook for 23 years. I still have it. If you're watching this and you've ever had to say goodbye to someone you love, please share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe. These stories matter, and your support helps me keep telling them. After Emma left, I threw myself into work with a desperation that bordered on obsession. I rented a larger kitchen space, hired my first employee, a single mother named Rosa who needed flexible hours, and started taking custom orders for weddings and parties. I was building something bigger than just a business. I was creating a place where women like me could find stability and dignity. Sarah grew up in that kitchen, doing homework at the metal prep tables and learning to fold cake boxes before she could ride a bike. She never knew her father, never asked about him, seemed content with our world of flour and sugar and women who understood that sometimes family is what you build, not what you're born into. By the time Sarah was in high school, I owned 3 retail locations and employed 47 people. 90% of them were single mothers, women who'd been abandoned or betrayed or simply forgotten by the world. I offered health insurance, paid time off, and on-site childcare. I knew what it meant to work while your baby was sick, to choose between rent and groceries, to smile at customers while your heart was breaking. The factory came next. I'd saved every penny for 15 years, reinvesting profits instead of buying luxuries, living in the same small apartment even as my business grew. When the old textile factory on the outskirts of town went up for sale, I saw possibilities where others saw problems. It took 3 years to renovate, to install industrial ovens and conveyor systems, to create a production facility that could supply grocery stores across 3 states. But we did it. We built something that employed over 200 people, most of them women who'd been given second chances by an employer who understood their struggles. I never married. There were men over the years, good men who wanted to build lives with me, but I'd learned to be careful with my heart. Sarah was enough family for me, and the women who worked in my factory were enough community. Sarah graduated valedictorian from high school, got a full scholarship to study business at the state university, and came back to work alongside me. She had David's gentle wisdom and my stubborn determination, and she understood that our company was more than just a business. It was a statement about the value of women who'd been written off by the world. I was 45 when my parents walked into my factory that day. 26 years had passed since they'd thrown me out. 26 years of building a life they knew nothing about. I watched them from my office window, trying to reconcile these frail, nervous people with the giants who'd once had the power to destroy my world. My mother's hair was completely gray now, and she walked with a cane. My father's shoulders were hunched, his face creased with lines that spoke of worry and disappointment. They were talking to Janet, my receptionist, explaining that they'd heard we hired people with various backgrounds and wondering if there might be opportunities for someone with warehouse experience. My father, it turned out, had been laid off from his job at the distribution center. They were behind on their mortgage, facing foreclosure, and this was their last hope. I could have walked down there then, could have revealed myself and watched the shock bloom across their faces. But I didn't. Instead, I called Janet and told her to bring them to the conference room. I would interview them myself, but they weren't to know who I was. "Tell them the owner wants to meet with them personally," I said, "but don't mention my name." I changed out of my business suit and into the simple black dress I kept in my office closet. I pulled my hair back severely and removed my jewelry. I wanted to look like an employee, not an owner. When I walked into that conference room, my mother glanced up with polite interest. My father was studying his hands, embarrassed by his circumstances. Neither of them recognized me. 26 years of living had changed me, of course. I was no longer the desperate 19-year-old they'd thrown away. I was a woman who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd survived abandonment and loss and created something beautiful from the ashes of their rejection. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, I said, sitting across from them at the conference table. "I understand you're looking for employment." My mother's voice was smaller than I remembered, worn down by years of disappointment. "We're not asking for charity," she said. "We're willing to work. We just need a chance." I looked at my father, this man who'd once been the center of my world, who'd changed the locks on my childhood home and never looked back. "What kind of work experience do you have?" They told me about their jobs, their layoffs, their mounting debts. They spoke about their daughter who'd disappointed them years ago, who'd made bad choices and brought shame to the family. They'd tried to find her once, they said, but she'd disappeared completely. "We should have handled things differently," my mother said, tears gathering in her eyes. "We were young. We were scared. We thought we were protecting our reputation. But we lost our daughter, and we've regretted it every day since." I sat there listening to them apologize to a stranger for the daughter they'd destroyed, and I felt something break open in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of terrible clarity. These weren't the monsters who'd haunted my nightmares. They were just people. Small, frightened people who'd made the worst decision of their lives and spent decades paying for it. The position we have available is entry-level, I told them. Part-time, minimum wage, but with benefits. You'd be working in packaging, standing for long hours, taking orders from supervisors who might be younger than you. "We'll take it," my father said immediately. "We'll take anything." I stood up, walked to the window that overlooked the production floor where dozens of women worked with purpose and dignity. "There's one more thing," I said. "This company has a policy of supporting single mothers, women who've been abandoned by their families. Every employee here has a story of survival. Can you work alongside women like that? Can you respect them?" My mother's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, we can." I turned back to them, these two people who'd given me life and then taken it away, who'd forced me to rebuild myself from nothing. "Then you can start Monday. Janet will give you the paperwork." As they stood to leave, my father paused at the door. "Thank you," he said. "You don't know what this means to us. We've been praying for a miracle, and I think you might be it." After they left, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the sun set through the windows. Sarah found me there an hour later, still staring at nothing. "Mom?" she said. "Are you okay?" I told her about the interview, about the decision I'd made. She listened without judgment. This daughter who'd grown up knowing she was loved completely and unconditionally. "Are you going to tell them?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe someday. Or maybe this is enough." My parents worked in my factory for 3 years. They were good employees, punctual, hardworking, grateful for the opportunity. They never knew that the woman who'd saved them was the daughter they'd thrown away. The grandchild they'd never met was the owner of the company that employed them. I watched them sometimes from my office window, saw my mother laughing with her co-workers, saw my father helping younger employees with heavy boxes. They seemed lighter somehow, unburdened by the weight of their mistake in a way that was only possible because they didn't know the full scope of what they'd lost. They retired when my father turned 70, with a pension from the company and enough savings to keep their house. At their retirement party, they stood up to make a speech about second chances and the kindness of strangers. "We worked for a company that believes in redemption," my mother said, her voice strong and clear. "We'll never forget the generosity that was shown to us when we needed it most." I was standing in the back of the room watching them when my mother's eyes met mine across the crowd. For just a moment, something flickered in her expression. A recognition, maybe, or just the shadow of a memory. But then Sarah appeared at my elbow, and the moment passed. After they left that night, I found a note on my desk. It was from my mother, written in the careful handwriting I remembered from childhood grocery lists and birthday cards. "To the owner of this wonderful company," it read, "thank you for giving 2 old people a chance to make things right. We had a daughter once who we failed completely. We pray every day that someone showed her the same kindness you've shown us. We hope she found a way to build a good life despite our mistakes. We hope she's happy. We hope she's loved. We hope she can forgive us someday, even though we'll never forgive ourselves." I kept that note. I still have it. If this story has moved you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about resilience, redemption, and the complicated nature of family. Share your own story in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful healing happens when we realize we're not alone in our struggles. 2 weeks after my parents' retirement party, I got a call from the hospital. My mother had suffered a stroke. She was stable, but the doctors weren't sure about long-term effects. My father was beside himself. This man who'd lost his job, his dignity, and his daughter, now facing the possibility of losing his wife, too. I went to the hospital that night, not as their daughter, but as their former employer, someone who cared about their well-being. I sat with my father in the waiting room, listened to him talk about their life together, their regrets, their fears. "We made so many mistakes," he said, his voice broken. "We thought we were protecting our family, but we destroyed it instead. Our daughter, she was everything to us, and we threw her away because we were scared of what people would think." "Tell me about her," I said gently. He pulled out his wallet, showed me a picture from my high school graduation. I was wearing a blue dress, smiling at the camera, unaware that in 2 years my world would fall apart. "She was so smart," he said. "So kind. She used to bake these incredible cakes for our birthdays, stay up all night working on them. She wanted to make people happy, and when she needed us most, we failed her." I sat there looking at that picture of my younger self, thinking about the girl who'd stood on street corners with cardboard boxes, who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd employed the parents who'd abandoned her without ever telling them the truth. "Maybe she's okay?" I said. "Maybe she built a good life." "I hope so," he whispered. "I hope she's happy. I hope she has children who love her. I hope she never has to wonder if she's worth loving because she is. She always was." My mother recovered slowly. The stroke had affected her speech, but her mind was clear. I visited them both regularly, bringing flowers and books and updates about the women who'd worked with them at the factory. I told them about Sarah, about her graduation from college, about her plans to expand the business into new markets. "She sounds wonderful," my mother said, her words careful but clear. "You must be very proud." "I am," I said. "She's everything I hoped she would be." One evening, when my mother was feeling stronger, she asked me to stay after visiting hours. The nurses knew me, knew I'd been generous with the hospital's children's wing, so they looked the other way. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice soft in the darkened room. "I know who you are." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "I've known for months," she said. "Maybe I've known since the day you interviewed us. You have your father's eyes, and you hold your head the same way you did when you were little. But more than that, you have the same kindness that made you bake cakes for people's birthdays." I couldn't speak. 26 years of careful distance, of hidden identity, crumbling in an instant. "Why didn't you tell your father?" I finally asked. "Because he's not ready," she said. "He carries so much guilt, so much shame. If he knew what you'd built, what you'd become, how you'd taken care of us without us knowing, it would destroy him." "And you?" She reached for my hand with fingers that were weaker now, but still familiar. "I'm destroyed anyway," she said. "I've been destroyed since the day I packed your clothes in garbage bags and chose my reputation over my daughter. This doesn't change that." We sat in silence for a long time, two women who'd lost each other and found each other again in the most unexpected way. "I want you to know," she said finally, "that every cake I ate at the factory tasted like home. I didn't know why until now, but they tasted like the cakes you used to make for us. Like love. Like everything we threw away." I started crying then, 26 years of tears that I'd held back, 26 years of grief for the family I'd lost and the parents I'd never stopped loving despite everything. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry we failed you. I'm so sorry we missed watching you become this incredible woman. I'm so sorry we never met our granddaughter." "Her name is Sarah," I said. "She's 23. She's beautiful and smart and kind, and she's going to change the world, like her mother did," my mother said. We talked until dawn, filling in the gaps of 26 years, sharing stories and sorrows and the complicated love that had survived even the worst betrayal. I told her about the pregnancy, about the fear and desperation, about building a life from nothing. She told me about the years of regret, about the private investigators they'd hired, about the way they'd searched for me until they'd run out of money and hope. "We thought you were dead," she said. "We thought we'd killed you with our cruelty." "You almost did," I said. "But I had Sarah to live for, and later I had Emma for a while. And then I had all the women who needed jobs and second chances. I had reasons to keep going." When the sun came up, I kissed my mother's forehead and promised to come back. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in decades. Not because I'd forgiven them, forgiveness was still too big, too complicated, but because I'd finally told the truth. My mother died 6 weeks later, peaceful in her sleep, with my father holding her hand. I was there too, standing in the corner of the room, watching the woman who'd given me life slip away. At the funeral, I sat in the back row with Sarah, 2 anonymous mourners paying respects to a woman who'd worked at our factory. My father spoke about their marriage, their mistakes, their hope that somewhere their daughter was living a good life. She would have been so proud of the woman who gave us our second chance, he said, looking directly at me. Catherine would have loved to meet her. After the service, people came up to my father to offer condolences. Former co-workers, neighbors, the pastor who'd married them 48 years earlier. I waited until the crowd thinned, then approached him myself. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "Your wife was a good woman." He looked at me with eyes that were red from crying, but clear in a way they hadn't been in years. "She was," he said. "She made mistakes. We both did, but she was a good woman. She loved deeply, and she regretted deeply." "She knew she was loved," I said. "That's what matters." He nodded, then surprised me by pulling me into a hug. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, for giving us jobs when no one else would, for treating us with dignity when we didn't deserve it, for being the miracle we needed." I hugged him back, this man who'd once been my hero and then my destroyer, and now was just a broken person trying to make sense of his losses. "Take care of yourself," I said. "Your wife would want you to be happy." "I'll try," he said. "I'll try to be the man she deserved, even if it's too late." I left him standing there in the cemetery, surrounded by flowers and memories, and the weight of a lifetime of choices. I never saw him again. 3 months later, I got a call from his neighbor. My father had died in his sleep, peacefully, with no signs of distress. The neighbor was calling because she'd found my business card in his wallet, along with a note that said, "If something happens to me, please call this number. Tell them thank you." I arranged his funeral, paid for his burial next to my mother, and stood in the same back row of the same church where I'd mourned her. This time there were fewer people, mostly neighbors and former co-workers who remembered an old man who'd been grateful for a second chance. The pastor spoke about redemption and grace, about the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds. I thought about my parents, about the choices that had shaped all our lives, about the strange mercy of being able to care for the people who'd hurt me most without them ever knowing the gift they'd been given. After the service, I walked to their graves and placed a cake on each headstone. Simple vanilla cakes with buttercream frosting, the kind I'd made for their birthdays when I was young and still believed in unconditional love. "I hope you're together," I said. "I hope you're at peace. I hope you know that despite everything, you raised a daughter who learned to build rather than destroy." The wind picked up, scattered some of the frosting, and I imagined it was them, finally free from the weight of their mistakes, finally able to love without fear. Today, Sarah runs the company. She's expanded it into 5 states, employs over 1,000 people, and has never forgotten that we're in the business of second chances. She knows the story of her grandparents now, knows how they worked for us without knowing who we were, knows how complicated love can be. "Do you think they would have been proud?" she asked me once. "I think they would have been amazed," I said, "but I think they were always proud. They just didn't know how to show it." I'm 51 now, and I've learned that healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like quiet dignity, like choosing kindness over revenge, like building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Sometimes it looks like giving someone a job when they need it most, even if they don't know they're receiving grace from the daughter they threw away. I kept my parents' secret until the day they died, and I've kept it still. This is the first time I've told this story, the first time I've admitted to the world that for 3 years, I employed the people who'd abandoned me, cared for them, provided for them, and never asked for recognition or apology. I don't know if that makes me strong or weak, generous or foolish. I only know that it made me human, and that being human means carrying love and hurt in equal measure, means choosing who we want to be even when we have every right to choose otherwise. The factory still operates, still employs women who need second chances, still believes in the radical idea that everyone deserves dignity and opportunity. It's my parents' legacy as much as mine, built on the foundation of their mistake and my refusal to let that mistake define me. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between meetings, I'll walk through the production floor and remember the girl who stood on street corners with cardboard boxes, who believed that sweetness could heal the world one cake at a time. She was right, in her way. Not because the world is particularly sweet, but because choosing to create beauty in the face of cruelty is the most powerful thing any of us can do. I never had to tell my parents who I was. They worked for me, retired with dignity, and died knowing they'd been forgiven by a stranger. In the end, maybe that was the kindest gift I could give them. The grace of not having to face the full weight of what they'd lost. The mercy of being loved without having to earn it. That's what I've learned about family, about forgiveness, about the complicated mathematics of love and loss. Sometimes the greatest strength is in what we choose not to say, not to do, not to demand. Sometimes the most powerful victory is the one no one else ever knows about. If this story has touched you, if you've ever struggled with forgiveness or family, or the choice between revenge and grace, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and let me know in the comments what you think. These stories matter because they remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, and that sometimes the most broken things can be rebuilt into something beautiful. The girl who was thrown away at 19 became a woman who built an empire. The parents who chose reputation over love spent their final years working for the daughter they'd abandoned, never knowing they'd been saved by the very person they'd destroyed. And somewhere in that strange circle of pain and grace, all of us found a kind of peace. That's the story I needed to tell, the secret I've carried for decades, the truth that has shaped everything I've built. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. Thank you for reminding me that even the hardest stories deserve to be told.